Good evening all, and welcome. Tonight, we are going to be venturing into people's homes, with their permission of course, to explore some rather spooky happenings on their property. I hope you're ready, because it's time to get comfortable, grab your EMF meter, and let the darkness take control. I lived in a farm around 4 years ago. From the moment we moved there, I could tell something was wrong. I felt uneasy in there, as if there was something constantly spying on me. A little detail about the place and situation. We didn't technically own the place. It was borrowed from a woman that was trying to sell it. Call it a demo. So we didn't have access to the house and slept on the wooden storage house. The farm itself was like this. There was a barbed wire gate that you manually had to move in the entrance, and in front of it was an open empty field with one of those outside washrooms to the right. Passing by it, there was a small group of trees, and then the place where we slept. Passing that was the actual house to the left, and then the forest. In the forest entrance there was a tree with a ripped plastic bag tied to its branches, meaning the bag had been tied there for a while. It was still small, and people used to do that here to make marks or something. And right in front of it, there was a mound. Someone buried something there. I moved there with 4 dogs, plus the dog that already lived there that we took care of. Our routine was to wake up at 5 a.m. to go to the city, so I could go to school and my parents could go to work. The first night we stayed there, I noticed my room was the only one in the entire house that didn't have a lock, and I couldn't sleep because of the weird feeling I had, and I stayed up all night and slept on my way to school. Then things got weirder. The door started opening at night. I dismissed it as the wind. Cliché, I know, but it became more frequent and violent. Then, still on the first week, I saw it. It was a black humanoid figure with a white face. It was like the white face had empty sockets, and instead of a mouth, just an empty cavity in its face. It stood on my door entrance staring at me. I decided I would not sleep while I lived there, and I would bring myself to move or do anything. So I just kept staring at it to convince myself my mind was playing tricks on me. Then, some nights later, it became impossible to pretend, because it started moving and doing things. It entered my room, tapped on the window. It was a metal window that was right beside my bed, and slightly moved things and kept being a general creep. Whenever I shone light on it, it disappeared, but the eerie feeling persisted. I started keeping a flashlight in my room and playing music to keep myself calm and awake. Eventually I started falling asleep in some days, and in those days I would wake up with headaches and the feeling my eyes had been pushed into my skull. Every time I awoke, it was in pain. My parents eventually got security cameras because while we were in the city, some people entered the place to go fishing, as there was a shortcut to the neighboring farm lake through our forest. This is an important detail. Then one day my aunt went to visit. She had some weird superstitions and said the place had gold buried in it for some reason. She went to the forest and saw the mound under the marked tree I spoke about earlier, and decided it was a good idea to dig it up. Bad idea. I was digging it, and I need to describe what happened now very well to pass the feeling, so bear with me. There is a certain feeling of digging dirt that differs from rocks or mud or clay. I learnt this that day as I dug the hole. Then after going through a small layer of fragmented rock, I hit something soft and resistant that felt like leather. I hit it harder and pushed through it. Immediately, After it, there was something hard with a complex and detailed shape. I tried to break through it since my aunt insisted it was a protection for the gold, and my parents were just whipping me into helping her. But it was no use, and it occupied most of the area of the hole, so we couldn't dig around it. It was like the hole was made specifically to bury it. My aunt then said she would cover the hole. She didn't cover it, and we went home. That night was hell. There was no tapping on the window. There was a strong banging. The thing kept entering my room non-stop, and even the flashlight wasn't working. I had to stay awake, feeling everything pressuring me. My door wouldn't close, and the thing would make noises and would be there staring at me. Now this is the part that makes the security cameras so important. They stopped working the moment it all started. There were 4 cameras, one pointing towards the farmhouse, one of them pointing to the washroom, one of them that showed my window, and one that pointed towards the forest. That morning I went to check on the camera footage, and all the cameras had stopped working except the one pointing at the forest. There was only static for the other 3, but that one had a small blur. After that night, it never appeared again. I still couldn't sleep because of fear, but it never actually showed up and things got calmer. We moved out some time after that. I keep thinking about it every now and then. 4 years later, it was too real, and there were things that were noticed by other people too. I especially keep thinking about the thing we hit while digging, and how that night was the worst. I keep asking myself if we found a body, or some haunted object that was hidden. I should start this by saying I didn't used to believe in ghosts. I work in a building from the 1890s that I was told was once a brothel. Once I was working at night, when no one else was there, to get some extra work done. A lot of weird stuff happens on the 2nd floor, and a little after 3 a.m., I had to go up there and put some things away and lock up. The light switch is at the top of the stairs, so I had to walk up the stairs in the dark. There are no windows in the hallway, so the only light was coming up from the bottom of the stairs. As I reached the top, I thought I saw a human figure walk across the hall, from one room to another, through 2 closed and locked doors, and fast, like a video sped up 50%. I was pretty freaked out, but skeptical. Maybe I just imagined it. The 2nd floor of this building has always freaked me out at night. My coworker too. So I turned on the light at the top of the stairs and walked down the hall to put some things away in the storeroom. While in the storeroom, a large machine part that had a flat bottom and was just sitting there on the table fell over while I had my back turned. It couldn't have just fallen over on its own or been knocked over by me. My heart started pounding and I said out loud, "I'm sorry, I'm leaving now." I locked the storeroom and started walking quickly back down the hall. As I walked, a little gust of wind blew through the hallway from behind me. There were no doors or windows open to the outside anywhere in the building, and no one else was there to have opened one, so it wasn't the result of a natural pressure differential. I started speed walking. As I passed between the 2 doors where I had seen the fast-moving apparition, I swear I heard a woman's voice whisper my name behind me. I turned off the light and stumbled quickly down the stairs. Halfway down, there's a small landing with a door. I fumbled with the latch that held the door open, terrified to look back up into the dark hallway above me. I got the door closed, and as I locked it, I felt sure that there was something on the other side. I was panicking. I clocked out of there as quickly as I could, and a few days later I went up there before dawn on an opening shift. and I was talking to the ghost, or whatever it was, the whole time, apologizing for my intrusion and asking to be left alone. I felt crazy, but it was better than being haunted again, and everything was normal except I felt someone lightly grasp the back of my shirt as I passed between the two doors. That was the last time I went up there alone in the dark. Due to my father's work, we were constantly chasing after his jobs, sometimes spending only a few months in a single location. After my father got a new job in this small town, we moved into a rather nice house on a dead-end road. It was a large house with wood floors and a generally exceptional feel about it. Glad to have found a nice house in our price range, we didn't really think too much on why it was empty and why the landlords were willing to rent it out for such a very low cost. It would only take a few months before we found out for ourselves what was going on. The haunting started as just a feeling that we kids would get from time to time. At first, it was just a general sense of unease, but this quickly escalated. As time went by, we slowly transformed from simply thinking we were being watched to seeing forms in the corner of our vision. The feeling of being watched had spread into the night at this point, and few of us were able to get a full night's rest. This continued on until we began to see things much closer to the forefront of our vision, and we had started seeing dark forms in the night, scaring us to the point that we'd all sleep on the same bed for a weak sense of security. Then we found the reason for the haunting. My brother and I were cleaning up an old closet that we had simply dumped a bunch of our toys into after we moved in. The bottom of it had a small wall marking into something of a built-in toy chest. We finally had some boxes to hold our things, and no longer needed to leave them in the closet. As we pulled out our things, we noticed that the carpet was loose. We were kids, and we were not very smart. Instead of telling our parents, we just pulled the carpet back, revealing something that none of us would ever forget. A tombstone. It was right there, with the name and dates already carved into it. Thinking there was someone buried in our closet, we quickly showed the tombstone to our parents. Thankfully, they decided to remove it from the house, and we thought that was it. But the haunting didn't stop. We started having nightmares and sick spells whenever we were alone in the house, and where it went from there was something a 7-year-old me couldn't understand. All I knew was fear, as I would awake at all hours of the night to see a dark figure standing over me, watching me sleep. I would cover my head in my sheets and pray to God to protect me. Usually it worked, but sometimes I would lower the sheet to see a dark, ghostly face now staring me in the eye, its face inches from my own. Soon, we were all seeing faces in the dark, and we stopped doing things on our own at night. We would share beds. We would never get up or do anything on our own, and often waking up whoever we were sleeping with to go to the bathroom or to get a drink of water. The final straw was the night I was foolishly walking around the house at night during a lightning storm. And as I was walking into my room, lightning flashed at just the right moment, and I saw a figure under my bed, staring at me with a grin that literally ran from ear to ear. Its needle-like teeth bared for me to see. I screamed in absolute terror, and it would take days for me to be willing to even play in my room again. We removed the bed frames and started sleeping with our mattresses on the floor for protection from whatever it was that I saw. But the nightmares and sightings continued. Thankfully, my father's job moved to a new location, and we were able to leave that house. In just 6 months, we went from happy to having such a nice home to wanting nothing more than to leave it behind. I will never forget that horror, and it has left permanent scars on my soul. Even to this day, almost 25 years later, I still have nightmares about living in that house. God only knows what monsters were there with us. And just saying this out loud has left my heart pounding with the fear of that memory. When my mum got remarried, we moved into a small one-story house. She married a man whom my sister and I had only met twice before, and they had only been dating 6 months before getting married. Even at 10 years old, I felt that it was quite a short amount of time to be marrying someone you'd only just dated a little bit. It was a house located on Nevada Street. It seemed fine at first, but I soon came to realize how unsettling it became. When my sister and I debated over who got the top bunk of our new rooms, we played rock, paper, scissors. I was victorious and rubbed it in her face. I enjoyed my top bunk that day, at least until night came. I don't remember how soon after moving in that it happened, but it wasn't too long, maybe less than a month, maybe 2 weeks. But I woke up in the middle of the night to loud thumps on the ceiling, like heavy boots walking right over my head. I was petrified. My body couldn't move because I was scared stiff. I just shut my eyes closed. Some nights it didn't sound like heavy boots. It sounded like little feet running across the ceiling. Just small thuds and then a boom. The sound of a small boy crashing to the floor of the ceiling. I would still wake up and be petrified. I tried telling my mum, but she shrugged it off as a nightmare, and I slept with the lights on since. We had an old, fat computer in the basement, like the ones in the 1990s before flat Macs were a thing. The basement was nice. The ceiling was done and there was a carpet. It was inviting. But man, did I get real heebie-jeebies down there. Just the feeling of always being watched and stared at. I was always down there downloading my favorite music onto CDs or playing pinball. At the time, I had a pet named Snickers who would always growl or bark at the walls. At first, I thought she was just being a dumb dog. Eventually, she started growling at me as I was sitting at the computer desk, growling and backing away. A chill crawled down my spine when I realized that she was barking at the space under the desk, right where I was sitting. Needless to say, I darted out of there immediately. I had always tried to avoid the basement because I swear when I'm down there, there's something peeking around the corner looking at me. I started to see more things, but as the years flew by, I didn't care anymore. From white shadows walking through the hallway to black figures climbing the walls, my mum wasn't listening anymore and could care less about what I had to say, so I just tried to ignore it. The thumps at night were still happening, and the feeling of being watched never went away. The thing that scared me the most was when I was 13. I laid on my parents' bed as my mum was using the bathroom. I got to play on her flip phone, and I was excited. I relaxed and played Tetris while waiting for my mum to come out. All of a sudden, something strong and powerful decided to kick the bed, making it slightly move. I could see ripples from where it was hit. I was absolutely scared out my skin, and I jumped out. I bolted to the bathroom, and my mum had locked the doors. I began pounding and begging my mum to let me in, almost in tears. She begrudgingly opened it, and of course told me that it could have just been a spring in the bed, popping. The Nevada house always carried this strong negative aura, evil almost. My stepfather and mother argued constantly, leading to him beating her and verbally and emotionally abusing us. It was like this entity thrived off it. We eventually moved out into a bigger 4-bedroom house with 2 levels. Walking into that house was like a breath of fresh air. No more thumps in the night, no more constantly feeling like I was being watched everywhere I went. It was relieving. My stepdad continued the abuse though. He was just a piece of crap that acted like a walking negative energy battery for any entities. When I was 16, I got a job as a personal assistant / cleaning lady for a very wealthy couple who lived in a big, beautiful mansion on Lake Michigan. It was a great job at the time, but after a while I had to quit because of everything that was going on. I made $12 an hour as a 16-year-old girl, and that was just crazy to me at the time. But now I know it's because the homeowners couldn't get anyone to stay and work for them. It could very well be because they're both major assholes, but I honestly didn't see them all that much during the school year, so it was fine. I would work 40 hours a week in the summer and part-time while I was in school. During the school year, I would hardly ever see them homeowners and would be left alone to clean the house. I had a key, alarm code, and gate code, so I could let myself in and out. In the summer months, I had help from a few other employees, but in the school year I did not. At first, I loved being in the house by myself. Don't get me wrong, the place was absolutely gorgeous, right on Lake Michigan, so I always would open the curtains to let the sunlight in and blast the surround sound speakers while I cleaned. It wasn't until I was by myself that I started noticing how weird this place was. Nothing ever exactly felt welcoming about the place. Sure, it was pretty to look at, but it was modern, and everything was hard marble and stone, not very homely feeling. My first experience happened when I was cleaning one day, in silence. I remember specifically not turning on the music, because I had a bad headache that day. All of a sudden, the speakers to the upstairs part of the house turned on. The way their speaker system works, you can control it by a touchpad in the kitchen, which would play the music everywhere besides the basement and master bedroom. To play music in those areas, you'd have to go to that touchpad and turn it on by controlling the pad and sync it up with the rest of the house. The reason that was so alarming was I was the only one there. I walked up the stairs to check out what was going on and figure out why and how the music had turned itself on seemingly by itself. I looked around and called out the homeowner's name, thinking someone came in without me noticing or something like that. But the doors were all still locked and no one was home. I shut off the music and went back downstairs, not thinking much of it. It started happening more often. I'd be listening to the music and it would turn off, or it would be off and would turn on in a completely different area of the house. I brushed it off as faulty and didn't think much of it. The second most prevalent story I remember from working was when I was cleaning the workout room in their basement. I never wanted to go in this room, and I really couldn't tell you why. Something about this room was weird. It was just super cold and dark, and I felt very anxious while being in there. I definitely tried to avoid it, but my boss would get mad when dust would build up, so I forced myself to go in there once a week to tidy up. I was in the workout room, using a broom and a mop, and I remember sweeping up the floor and prompting the broom against a machine while I used the mop. Suddenly the broom fell over, hitting the wall, the baseboard, and the floor as it fell, causing 3 distinct knocks. What I heard after scared me so badly, I refused to go back into the room by myself again. Immediately following the knocks made by the broom falling, 3 knocks responded in the exact same pattern the broom fell. But it was coming from inside the wall. I know what you're thinking, but no, it was not just an echo. It was not a scared animal. It was knocking. Deliberate knocking. I was completely alone in a big, quiet house in the middle of nowhere, and someone was knocking back at me from inside the wall. To this day, I have absolutely no explanation for what I experienced. Lastly, this was the first and only time I have ever seen anything paranormal with my 2 eyes. And I know this time, it's not me being paranoid or crazy, because I was with a coworker who saw it too. Sometimes, my boss would rent out her guest house, and we would clean it before the guests arrive. So this guest house has a glass hallway leading from one main area of the house to another. I was cleaning the glass while one of my coworkers, Bob, was standing next to me. Just then, I catch a glimpse of what looks like a boy in a blue shirt running by. I turned my head just as Bob turned his, and he asked if I had seen it too. Those are the craziest things that happened. It was nearly 6 years ago, and will always haunt me. A number of years ago, my family moved into a new house in the countryside. It was a beautiful Georgian mansion, very rare and very old, beautifully maintained. The previous owners were selling it at a ludicrously low price, and my parents had always dreamed of owning a home like this, and so they obliged. It wasn't before long, probably within the first few days, that we figured something was off. The house needed a lot of work, restorative work. Lots of the wood had started to go moldy and definitely needed replacing. The previous owners obviously didn't live here, and as such, it had deteriorated considerably. In any case, my parents had a lot of work cut out for them, and it was while they were clearing rubbish away that we saw something spooky. We were all just moving things and putting what we wouldn't need in bin bags to throw it out. When down the hallway we looked up, and all 4 of us saw a little girl happily and obliviously skipping away into the darkness. My dad immediately called out, "Hey, what are you doing?" and run over to see who this girl was and why she was in the house. His assumption was that she thought this house was still abandoned, which it no longer was, and was trespassing, despite the fact there were now cars in the driveway. But upon a thorough search of the house, did he find nothing. Sightings of this little girl continued. There'd be some nights where I'd hear giggling down the hallway, or I'd hear my door creak open and see a pair of eyes staring at me before vanishing into the dark. Every one of my family members was afflicted by the curse of this little girl, her infernal laughter, the fact that she breathed behind your head and when you turn around she wouldn't be there. It was driving my parents mad. They tried to get in contact with the previous owners, but they had moved out of the country, and my parents were starting to see why. They did some local research and didn't find a lot about the house. But about 4 months later, when my mum was digging up the garden, did she unearth something unexpected. She found a shoe, and as she was pulling the shoe out of the ground, did she see that it was attached to a skeletal leg. The police were called, and it turns out that she had unearthed the remains of a small girl, probably no older than 6 to 8. This was a terrifying discovery. We paid for a casket and gave the little girl a funeral. Only after that did the activity truly die down. Not altogether though, just slightly minimized. As time went on, the activity nearly completely stopped, and we almost forgot that we had a ghostly inhabitant in our home. The house, as it turns out, was a lot harder for my parents to do than they originally thought. It needed so much more work and money than they were prepared to invest, and sadly had to sell the property and take a loss. I was glad to no longer be the plaything of some spiritual girl from the 5th dimension. The next house we moved into was completely ghost-free, and that's the way I think I'll have my life from here on out. Almost 2 years ago, my boyfriend and I decided to move from one house to a much bigger one that had belonged to his aunt. At the time of the move, my son was 2 and my daughter just a few months. A few weeks after moving in, I noticed my son would get out of bed and walk down the hallway and not say anything, just stare at me. I would ask him if he needed something, but he would never respond. I'd pick him up and carry him back to bed. I assumed maybe he was just sleepwalking, since I also used to sleepwalk as a child. One night he wakes me up, and he's all in a panic, trying to get me to follow him into the living room. He would just keep randomly repeating, "Come on, Mummy, come on." So I get up, and we walk to the living room and the TV's on. It's just a static screen, so there's nothing playing, and he's staring at me with a very blank expression. I assume he's sleepwalking again. I ask him if he turned the TV on, and he said no. And when I asked him if he could turn it off and show me how to do it, he couldn't find the power button and got frustrated that he couldn't figure it out. The TV I had at the time is made a little weird. The power button is located on the back side of it to the right, and I assume it wasn't him who turned it on, if he didn't even know how to turn it off, not to mention that he's 2. Fast forward a few months, and I'm in the kids' playroom sitting on the couch with my son, who fell asleep on my lap while watching a movie. I heard movement in the kitchen, so I get up to see if my boyfriend was awake to find no one there. It felt weird, like I was being watched. So I go back to the playroom and grab my son to put him in the bed. Over the next few weeks, I keep hearing people walking when no one is awake. One night we get home from a late night grocery shopping trip, and as I'm pulling bags out of the trunk of the vehicle, I hear someone humming. So I look around my yard to see if anyone is around or out for a late night stroll, which wouldn't make sense since I live on a random back road surrounded by woods. I walk around to the backyard and still see nothing. One week, my boyfriend's dad and stepmother decide to come and stay with us for a few days to visit. The first few nights, they were here and everything was normal. But then one night, something kind of weird happened. My daughter was being extremely grouchy and absolutely refusing to go to bed. So I'm up with her in the living room at 12 trying to rock her to sleep, and everyone else is already in bed. I finally get her to pass out at 1:30, lay her down and get myself in the bed. I climb under the comforter and pull out my phone to scroll through the internet, and hear something like someone crawling into my room on the floor around my bed and over to my boyfriend's side where he's asleep. I'm a little creeped out, because I know it's not my daughter. She can't get out of the crib on her own. Then I think maybe my son is up, trying to sneak out of bed, but I'm still too nervous to look over there. So I get up and walk out the room to peek in on my daughter, and make sure she's still asleep, and then go down the hall to my son's room to see if he is still soundly asleep in bed. I get back to my bed and try to play it off, like I had probably just imagined it and needed sleep. The next morning, everyone's in the living room drinking coffee and just talking, and I look over at my boyfriend and ask him if he heard anything last night. He said no, he didn't wake up last night, but his stepmom chimes in with, "I heard you in the living room at 3 a.m. Does the baby usually keep you up that late?" I told her it wasn't me. I was already in bed. But I heard the baby banging around on the walls and moving toys. I assumed you were still up. I told her it wasn't us and that we'd already gone to sleep at that point. And now, currently, I keep having the dreams of myself laying in bed at night and a figure of someone just walking in the room and standing over me, only to wake up and realize it was a dream. Discomfort for sure, and I don't really have anyone to discuss this with, nor do my boyfriend's family have a belief in the paranormal. But I just really want to speak about it with someone, because it looks like I'm crazy. I've had some weird things happen to me in my life, and after moving out of a house where there was an incident involving black magic, we got the government quarters in a society that was exclusively for the families of individuals working in the forest department. It was a cheerful place unlike the last, and there were many kids around my age. My school was close, and it was a well-knit neighborhood with friendly people. So much so that I was able to trespass into anyone's house and they wouldn't mind. It was still one of the best places I had lived in, because more than anything, it was adventurous. There were tall Ashoka trees all around, many kucha houses, and an aura that was hard to beat. This place had an old world charm. The only unconventional part about the place was my house. It was of older times, probably built around British Indian era, and had a unique architectural style. The front hall had a flat roof, while the middle portion was raised in a dome, and at the very end, near the washroom and beyond, there was no roof. The first time we entered, there were many bizarre wall paintings in the middle portion that we didn't comprehend at all. There were 2 doors for the entry of the house, the front one and the one at the very back that opened in front of a fence, and behind that was a forest. There was a blackened dead tree across that had been the victim of lightning. We had a beautiful garden that was adjacent to the house with lemon and custard apple trees at the end of it. It was our storehouse, and we didn't know who lived there before. The caretaker didn't tell us much other than the person moved somewhere else. Still, we didn't want to take any risks and had a holy ritual performed on the property before we lived there. It was an interesting place. I made new friends, and we used to play in the society compound all day long after school. The forest office was in the society itself near the main gate. The place was surrounded with rocky terrains and forest. As kids, we explored a lot, and I often saw soldiers from afar marching around behind the terrains. There was another forest office in the compound, which was old and closed forever. It was locked, and the old office almost in front of my house, at a diagonal distance, was built on an elevated stage. It had high walls and a rotting structure. It was a home to many mossy outgrowths, and it had no roof either. By the side of it was a burnt house that had been abandoned. Nobody went there. It was instructed by the temple priest and his wife, as there was a black dog that lived there that had gone mad. We used to obey that, as it was near the forest, so poisonous snakes and monkeys were a daily sight, and we'd gotten used to it. The monkeys came every evening at 5 o'clock, and I had some really funny incidents with them. One day we were playing cricket near the old office, when an older boy played an aerial shoot to the building. There was no roof, so the ball went in. and I was sent to retrieve it. I climbed on the edges of bricks that were jutting out of the terrain adjoining to the office and entered from above. It was a very creepy place, with a deadening black smell all around. I found some bones lying in the trash, probably left by dogs. I came out, went about my business, but there was something off. The next day in the morning, my mum came to us as we were talking about some news. She had a dream last night, where she saw a lot of buried treasure in our house. It was in the back wall of our storehouse, and also there was some voice that guarded it. She saw someone digging there in the dream, a faceless man. We all went into the garden and opened the storehouse, and the wall at the back was put up again. Someone did try to break it down. It wasn't painted and was mere bricks and cement, albeit thicker than the other ones. My mum didn't proceed further. She said that she heard the voice in her dream saying that to acquire the gold, one had to sacrifice their children, and it couldn't be escaped or bargained with, and she wasn't willing to take such a chance. We went inside in a few minutes and heard someone at the door. It was our neighbor that lived far in front near the main gate adjacent to the new office. He had walked all the way down to our place, and it was early in the morning. It was a bit surprising because we didn't have much interaction with him. He had a confused expression, and he saw my mum and aunt and said, "You'll find this funny, but I had a dream about your house." He told us the exact same dream that my mum said, and even the same location. It was very strange. While we were all talking, we saw another girl walk towards us. She lived near the terrain, and to our surprise, even she had the same dream. Everyone wanted us to investigate now, but Mum was in no mood. One thing that she wanted to do was know about the place. The caretaker was questioned, and he revealed that the person who lived there was of Anglo-Indian descent. He lived here some 22 years back and was a treasure explorer. He knew of the treasure in this place and tried to search for it. It was said that he sacrificed his own son to get the wealth, but wasn't able to bear the guilt and went crazy and disappeared. The broken wall was put up by someone at night the day he disappeared. No one saw who did it. The man had murdered his son right in front of our washroom in the last section that opened near the forest. It gave me shudders, because there were frequent power cuts in those days at night, and I used to take long showers at midnight. The idea of something lurking and guarding the walls and adjacent treasure were enough to give me chills. We mutually decided to do nothing about it, and left town later that year. My flatmates and I moved into a gorgeous house 2 months ago. Roughly 2 weeks in, we started hearing boot steps in the hall and on the front porch. We are in close proximity to the neighbors, but I doubt it's them we're hearing at 3, 4, and 5 a.m. Since moving in, I feel like I'm being watched when I'm in the shower. Just over 2 weeks ago, I was laying in bed watching videos on my phone when I felt something tugging at my charger cable. We don't have any pets, and ever since then things have gotten progressively worse for me. I hear muffled voices outside my room at night, and I've checked them out on plenty of occasions, and there's no one there. And I can't hear anything from the neighbors either. On a night that I find myself home alone, i.e. without my boyfriend, I tend to have quite explicit dreams, though never with my boyfriend, and I wake up feeling guilty. If I'm at my boyfriend's though, they're always about being chased or messed up houses with traps and not being able to get away. When I'm home, I wake up with bruises that were not there before when I went to bed. I had one on my inner thigh, both. Some on my upper arms, just blotches of bruising. I know I can be clumsy at times, but I know if I've hurt myself. I pulled an all-nighter just over a week ago to do some work for a website that's launching soon, and I saw someone's head and shoulders around the corner from the dining room at about 5:30 to 6 a.m. Only one of the flatmates was awake. I asked if it were him, and he said it wasn't. Last week, I went to pull the lounge curtains because there was glare on the TV. I had my door open to air my room out because I'd been away for a few days. I saw the palm of an androgynous hand waving at me. I told my flatmate, and he said that they were going to check it out. We stepped into my room, and we were instantly freezing, breathing fog and all. It doesn't feel like my room anymore, it just feels wrong. That night, I decided I was sleeping on the couch in the lounge. But come roughly 5 a.m., just as I was drifting off to sleep, I hear something tapping at the keyboard. All our computers are in the lounge, or we would never see each other because of work schedules. And I was the only person there, and as previously mentioned, we don't own pets. My computer was off though, so I couldn't see anything. However, it was staying on at night with a blank document open. All of this means I'm having a lot of trouble sleeping. And then just now, I heard 4 rather heavy raps at the window. I really don't want to look, and I'm not going to. I know there's something wrong in this house. So things at the new house have still been going on, and in some respects are picking up. The other day I left my phone on my desk while I went to the bathroom. When I returned, I noticed that my phone was half removed from the faceplate. Everyone else was either asleep or at work at this point, as the flat comprises, for the most part, of night shifts. About a week later, I had gone out the front door for a cigarette, as there was a pretty decent storm blowing, and the backyard offers no protection in a southerly. I had locked the door behind me when I came inside, because I was the only person home. Just over an hour late. I heard the front door open and close, and I went out to greet whichever flatmate had come, thinking that someone had finished work early. But I couldn't find anyone in the house, and the front door was now unlocked. About 4:30 the following morning, I was sitting at my computer in the lounge when my right shoulder got very cold. I peered sideways at my shoulder and almost noticed that a single strand of my hair was bouncing up and down, almost as if someone was pulling a pig's tail. I spent a few weeks away from home, and last night was my first night back in the house. At 1 a.m. today, I went to go to the bathroom before going to bed. As I pushed open the bathroom door, I saw a black, shadowy figure standing by the window. I thought nothing of it, as I was half asleep. But as I went to sit down, I noticed that the bathroom scales were going through the tarring process. These are electric scales and have to be stepped on to turn on. But ever since you move, they have to be lifted slightly for them to register that you want to use them. After questioning the flatmates that were home at the time, I found that no one had been in that bathroom previously to me, and seeing that I use the scales regularly, I know that they only stay on for about 30 seconds after use, or 15 seconds if not being used after tarring. At midday today, I went to the loo, then decided I would shower as I needed to wash my hair for the weekend. I went to get my towels and hairbrush from the sleep out, and when I came back, I went to turn the door handle to quietly close the bathroom door behind me, so as to not wake up my flatmate in the next room with banging doors after his graveyard shift, only to discover that the bathroom door had been locked. I'm thankful I hadn't completely shut the door behind me, not even 5 minutes previously, seeing as it was only he and I home. I hadn't worried about locking the door while using the loo, and also while I was showering, I noticed that a leg to the onesie that was hanging on the back of the door was sort of jerking around at odd intervals, but none of the towels or my gowns, which were also hanging on the door, had been moved at all. The weird dreams are still happening, albeit less frequently, while I was at my sister's place. This place still feels terrible. I sleep with my light on, and documentaries playing on YouTube on my phone. But thankfully, I haven't woken up with any new bruises in the last few weeks. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed tonight's Ghostly Tales. If you did, don't forget to drop a comment or leave me a like or subscribe, all the good stuff. As always, a huge thank you to my amazing patrons whose names can be seen on screen. Your support really does mean a lot. It helps keep the channel flowing and everything running smoothly, and I appreciate it tremendously. Thanks, guys. If there is a story that you would like to share, you can find the relevant links in the description. But for now, guys, I'm gonna sign off. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.